The Messerschmitt Bf-109 pilot's laughter crackled through his radio as he watched the lumbering American bomber formation approach through scattered clouds over the German countryside. "Look at them," Hauptmann Klaus Richter called to his wingmen, his voice dripping with contempt. "Flying whales. They think armor and guns can replace speed and agility. Today, we show them the error of their thinking." His squadron of 8 fighters peeled away from their patrol altitude, beginning their combat descent toward the B-17s, cruising at 23,000 feet. Klaus had 17 kills to his name, mostly RAF Lancasters and the occasional Spitfire that strayed too close to occupied France. These American bombers, these flying fortresses, as propaganda claimed them to be, would add nicely to his tally. After all, how dangerous could they possibly be? They were transport aircraft with delusions of invulnerability, slow and predictable, crammed with bombs instead of the maneuverability that kept the plane alive in combat. As Klaus aligned his approach vector, calculating the perfect angle to shred the lead bomber's wing with his 20mm cannons, he noticed something that gave him momentary pause. The nose of the B-17 bristled with gun barrels. The top of the fuselage had a bubble turret slowly rotating. The belly featured another turret, and he could see guns jetting from the waist positions. Even the tail seemed to have defensive armament. "Wolfgang," he called to his wingman, "count the gun positions on these things." A pause. "I see 10, maybe more. Mein Gott, they've turned their bomber into a porcupine." Klaus felt his smile fade slightly, but his confidence remained. Guns were useless if the gunners couldn't hit a fast-moving target. The FW-190s and Bf-109s of the Luftwaffe routinely outmaneuvered British defensive fire. These Americans, fresh to the air war over Europe, would be no different. Their gunners would panic, spray ammunition in every direction, and accomplish nothing as German cannon shells tore their aircraft apart. "Listen to me," Klaus commanded his squadron. "These are just big targets with a lot of noise. We use our standard tactics, high-speed passes, target the engines and wings, break away before they can track us properly. They probably can't even coordinate their fire. The Americans are famous for their mass production, not for their tactical thinking. We'll each take one, and we'll be back at the base for schnaufs before lunch. On my mark." Inside the lead B-17, baptized Memphis Belle by her crew, Technical Sergeant Robert or Bob Mitchell pressed his face against the plexiglass of the top turret, watching the German fighters begin their attack run. His gloved hands gripped the twin .50 caliber machine guns, and through his headset, he heard the calm voice of their pilot, Captain James Morgan. "Fighters 9 o'clock high, gunners weapons free. Remember your training, lead your targets, watch your fields of fire, call out the attacks. Bombardier, we maintain course until the drop. Nobody breaks formation unless I give the word." Bob had trained for 8 months on these guns. He knew the B-17's defensive capabilities better than he knew his own apartment back in Chicago. 13 .50 caliber machine guns covering nearly every angle of approach, overlapping fields of fire that could create a literal wall of lead. The German pilots thought they were attacking a defenseless target. They were about to learn a lesson written in tracer fire and brass casings. The first Messerschmitt dove toward them, its wings sparkling as its cannons opened fire. Bob tracked the fighter smoothly, his thumbs hovering over the firing triggers. The German was coming in fast, probably expecting to make a single devastating pass and then escape before defensive fire could find him. "Not today, Fritz," Bob muttered, and squeezed both triggers. The twin 50s roared to life, their synchronized thunder shaking the turret. Bright tracer rounds lanced through the sky toward the approaching fighter. Bob saw his rounds walk toward the target, adjusted his aim by memory and instinct, and watched as .50 caliber bullets, each one capable of punching through an engine block, found their mark. The Messerschmitt seemed to shudder in midair as the heavy rounds struck its wing and engine cowling. Black smoke erupted from the fighter, and it rolled violently to the left, breaking off its attack run. Below, the ball turret gunner was already engaging a second fighter, while the waist gunners opened up on a third approaching from the rear quarter. Klaus Richter's eyes widened as he saw Wolfgang's fighter belch smoke and peel away, mortally wounded. The American fire wasn't the scattered, panicked spray he'd expected. It was precise, coordinated, and devastatingly effective. His radio exploded with confused calls from his pilots. "They're hitting everything! How are they tracking us? The fire is too heavy! I can't get close enough for a clean shot! Victor is down! His wing is gone! I saw it just disintegrate!" Klaus himself pulled out of his attack run as he saw tracers converging on his position from 3 different guns on the same bomber. The Americans weren't just firing wildly, they were coordinating, creating kill zones that forced attacking fighters into withering crossfire. His laughter had died completely now, replaced by something he hadn't felt in the cockpit since his early days of training: genuine fear. These flying fortresses weren't the easy prey he'd expected. They were flying bunkers, bristling with enough firepower to swat fighters from the sky like flies. And there were 36 of them in the formation. Second Lieutenant David Parker wiped sweat from his forehead as he climbed down from the B-17 simulator, his legs shaky from 3 hours of continuous emergency procedure drills. The November cold hadn't yet reached inside the training facility, and the intensity of the practice runs left him feeling like he'd just finished a marathon. His instructor, a grizzled veteran named Major Edmund Walsh, who'd flown B-24s in the Pacific before being reassigned to training duty, stood with his clipboard and the expression of a man permanently disappointed in the youth of America. "Parker," Walsh said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of too many cigarettes and too little sleep, "your reaction time on the No. 3 engine fire was 4 seconds too slow. In combat, that's the difference between bringing your crew home and becoming a statistic in someone's report." David nodded, too tired to be defensive. "Yes, sir. I'll work on it." "You'll do more than work on it. You'll dream about it. You'll practice it until it's pure reflex." Walsh's stern expression softened slightly. "But your coordination with your co-pilot was solid, and you kept the aircraft stable through the simulated hydraulic failure. That's something." The praise, minimal as it was, felt like a medal. David had been training to pilot the B-17 Flying Fortress for 6 months now, ever since washing out of fighter school due to a depth perception issue that didn't affect larger aircraft but made the tight, high-speed maneuvering of fighters too risky. At first, he'd been devastated. Every kid who dreamed of flying wanted to be a fighter pilot, the lone wolf ace with kills painted on his fuselage. Bomber pilots were the bus drivers of the air, or so he thought. Then he'd seen his first B-17 up close. The aircraft was massive, nearly 75 feet long, with a wingspan that stretched over 100 feet. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, gave the aircraft a sound like rolling thunder when it powered up. The fort, as crews called it, could carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs and still climb to 30,000 feet. Its range exceeded 2,000 miles with a full combat load. But what really changed his perspective was learning about the defensive armament: 13 .50 caliber machine guns positioned to cover virtually every approach angle. The aircraft could put out a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,000 rounds per minute. The B-17 wasn't just a bomber, it was a flying weapons platform that happened to deliver ordnance. "Lieutenant Parker," Walsh continued, consulting his notes, "you've been assigned to a crew forming up at Bassingbourn in England. Your co-pilot is Second Lieutenant Tommy Chen, transferred from the China-Burma-India theater after his previous pilot was killed. Your bombardier is First Lieutenant Marcus Williams, top of his class in bombardier school. Navigator is Second Lieutenant Samuel Goldstein, excellent marks in celestial navigation. You'll meet your enlisted crew when you arrive at the base." David absorbed the information, his mind already racing. A co-pilot with combat experience was invaluable. A top-tier bombardier meant their missions would count, their bombs would hit targets. A skilled navigator could mean the difference between finding the target and running out of fuel over the North Sea. When do I ship out, sir? 48 hours. Go home. See your family if you can manage it, and get your affairs in order. The air war over Europe isn't like the Pacific. The Germans have better fighters, better pilots on average, and they're defending their homeland now. The Luftwaffe you'll face has been fighting since 1939. They've perfected the art of bomber interception. Walsh paused, meeting David's eyes directly. The 8th Air Force has been losing aircraft at a rate that would horrify the civilian population if they knew the real numbers. Your job is to break that pattern. The B-17 can survive almost anything if it's flown right and the crew works as a unit. Learn your aircraft like it's part of your body. Trust your crew. Bring them home. The weight of that responsibility settled on David's shoulders like a physical burden. 9 other men would depend on his decisions, his reflexes, his ability to stay calm when flak turned the sky black, and fighters pressed their attacks despite the defensive fire. He thought about his father, a Great War veteran who'd flown reconnaissance biplanes over France, who'd told him stories of primitive aircraft held together with wire and canvas, of watching friends spiral down in flames because their planes had no parachutes, no defensive weapons, no chance once an enemy got on their tail. The B-17 was different. It represented American industrial might and engineering genius. It was designed from the first blueprint to survive, to fight, to complete the mission despite everything the enemy could throw at it. But it still required a crew that functioned perfectly, and David was being entrusted with 10 souls who would live or die based on his competence. I won't let them down, sir. Walsh almost smiled. See that you don't. Dismissed. Bassingbourn, England, January 1943. The base sprawled across the muddy English countryside, a collection of Quonset huts, hard stands for bombers, and the ever-present smell of aviation fuel and wet earth. David arrived on a supply plane from Scotland, his duffel bag containing everything he owned that mattered: letters from home, a photograph of his parents and younger sister, a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, and his flight gear. The operations building was a converted farmhouse, its windows covered with blackout curtains even during daytime. Inside he found Captain Harrison Webb, the squadron operations officer, a thin man with premature gray hair and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too many friends fail to return from missions. "Lieutenant Parker," Webb said, barely looking up from the mission board he was updating. "Your crew is assembling in Hut 7. Your aircraft is being assigned. We're expecting a batch of G models fresh from the States. They've improved the gun positions, added more armor around the engines. You'll get a chance to familiarize before your first mission." "When is our first mission, sir?" "When I say so, and not before. You think you're ready because you've logged simulator hours and some stateside flights. You're not ready. Nobody is ready for their first mission. You learn by surviving." Webb finally looked up, his eyes softening slightly. "Look, Parker, I'm not trying to break your spirit, but I've written too many letters to mothers and widows. The average crew lasts 15 missions. Your job is to be above average, way above average. 15 missions. The number required to complete a tour was 25. The math was grimly simple. David found Hut 7 and pushed through the door into warmth and the smell of cigarette smoke. 7 men looked up from various activities, one writing a letter, 2 playing cards, others just staring at the walls with the glazed expression of terminal boredom. "Gentlemen," David announced, "I'm Lieutenant Parker, your pilot. Which one of you is Chen?" A compact man with Asian features stood from a bunk in the corner. He looked older than David, probably mid-20s, with the kind of lean build that suggested either athleticism or not enough food. His handshake was firm. "Thomas Chen, sir. Call me Tommy. I flew 16 missions out of Kunming before my pilot augured in on our 17th. Glad to be flying with someone fresh. No offense meant. The last guy got overconfident, thought he'd seen everything. That's when the enemy surprises you." "None taken. What killed him?" "Flak got our number 4 engine over Hanoi.
By the book emergency, we'd practiced it 100 times, but he tried to maintain altitude instead of dropping immediately, wanted to stay with the formation. The engine fire spread to the wing fuel tank. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. I got out through the copilot window. 3 other crewmen made it. 6 didn't. The sobering account killed any small talk. David nodded slowly. Noted. We follow procedures and we don't gamble. Anyone else? A tall man with dark skin and sharp features stood. Marcus Williams, bombardier. I grew up in Harlem, if you're wondering about the accent. I can put a bomb in a pickle barrel from 25,000 feet in a crosswind. That's not bragging, sir. That's just fact. I didn't come here to miss targets.
Glad to have you, Williams. David turned to the others. The rest of you? A young man with thick glasses and nervous energy spoke up. Samuel Goldstein, navigator. I can get us there and back, sir. Studied astronomy at Brooklyn College before the war. The stars don't lie, and neither do my calculations. The remaining crewmen introduced themselves one by one. Technical Sergeant Robert Mitchell, top turret gunner from Chicago, built like a boxer with hands that looked too large for the delicate work of operating twin 50s. Staff Sergeant James Murphy, ball turret gunner, a small man with the kind of compact frame necessary to fit into the cramped, spherical turret beneath the aircraft. Staff Sergeant Anthony Russo and Staff Sergeant Frank Patterson, waist gunners, both from Pennsylvania and apparently cousins. Staff Sergeant Harold Jensen, tail gunner, a farm kid from Iowa with a drawl that made everything sound like a lazy Sunday afternoon. Sergeant Michael O'Brien, radio operator, from Boston, who spoke with the rapid-fire cadence of someone used to translating Morse code. And finally, Technical Sergeant William Harrison, the flight engineer and top turret gunner backup. He was older than the others, maybe 30, with graying temples and the bearing of a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life. I was building B-17s in Seattle before I enlisted. Figured if I knew how to build them, I could keep one flying. I know every rivet in these birds, Lieutenant. She'll stay in the air as long as I'm breathing. David looked at the assembled crew, his crew. They came from different backgrounds, different states, different worlds. But they'd been thrown together by the machinery of war and the bureaucracy of the Army Air Forces. His job was to make them into a unit, a single organism that could function under conditions of mortal terror. "Listen up," he began, and the casual posture of the crew shifted to attention. "I don't know most of you, and you don't know me. We're going to fix that, starting now. Major Walsh told me that the B-17 can survive almost anything if it's flown right and the crew works together. Notice he said and, not or. It's both or it's neither. We're going to train together, eat together, drink together until we can anticipate each other's movements. When we're at 25,000 feet and German fighters are coming at us from every direction, there won't be time for questions or confusion. Every man needs to know his job and trust that everyone else knows theirs." Mitchell spoke up. "With respect, sir, we've all been training for months. We know our jobs. You know the technical aspects. That's different. Tomorrow we get assigned our fort. We're going to fly her until she feels like home. We're going to practice emergency procedures until you can handle them in your sleep. And we're going to study German fighter tactics until we can predict their moves before they make them. Any questions?" "Yeah," Murphy said from his seat on the lower bunk. "Do we get to name the bird?" David smiled slightly. "That's tradition. When we've earned it, when we survive our first mission, we'll name her together. Fair enough?" Nods around the room. They were young, most of them, but there was a seriousness in their eyes that belied their ages. They'd do the statistics. They'd heard the stories. Some of them probably already attended funerals for friends who'd completed training only to die on their first or second mission. "Get some rest," David ordered. "Tomorrow, we meet our aircraft and start becoming a crew that brings each other home." Dismissed. As the men returned to their interrupted activities, Tommy Chen pulled David aside. "Sir, can I have a word?" "Sure. Walk with me." They stepped outside into the perpetual drizzle of an English winter. The base was active despite the weather. Ground crews working on aircraft, trucks moving supplies, the distant sound of an aircraft engine being tested. The war machine never stopped, never slept. "I want you to know,"
Tommy began, choosing his words carefully, "that I'm not going to question your authority in front of the men. But in the cockpit, we need to be partners. My job is to back you up, catch things you might miss, and take over if you're incapacitated. That means I need to be able to speak freely to you when we're flying." I agreed. In the cockpit, we're equals. I make the final calls, but I want your input. You've got combat experience. I'd be a fool not to use it. Good. Tommy looked out across the airfield, where a formation of B-17s was landing from a mission, their aluminum skin pockmarked with flak damage. The thing about flying these missions, Lieutenant, is that you can do everything right and still die. The random flak burst that hits your oxygen system, the fighter that comes out of the sun at the exact wrong moment, the mechanical failure that Murphy's Law guarantees will happen when you're deepest into enemy territory. But you can tilt the odds in your favor. Every smart decision, every moment of good crew coordination, every well-practiced procedure, they all add up. We might not control our luck, but we can control our skill. That's the plan. What else do I need to know? About the men, about the base, about flying combat? Tommy considered the question. The men are solid from what I've seen. Mitchell has a temper, but he channels it into his gunnery. Murphy's got nerves, but he's steady when it counts. The waist gunners seem competent. Jensen has the most important position. Tail gunner is where most fighter attacks come from, and he seems like he can handle it. O'Brien knows his radio equipment, and Harrison is probably the most valuable man on the crew after you. A good flight engineer can keep a dead bird flying long enough to get home.
And Goldstein and Williams? Goldstein's brilliant, but anxious. Make sure he has confidence in his calculations. Second-guessing himself at the wrong moment could get us lost. Williams is cocky, but apparently he has the skill to back it up. If he says he can hit the target, believe him. His ego isn't false confidence, it's justified pride. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the base washing over them. In the distance, David could see crews being debriefed, probably discussing the mission they'd just flown. Some looked relieved. Others looked haunted. "You asked what you need to know about flying combat," Tommy continued. "Here's the truth, sir. The first mission is the worst because you don't know what to expect. The second mission is worse because now you do know. After that, every mission is a mental battle between experience and fatigue. You get better at the job, but the stress accumulates. Guys start developing superstitions, rituals, some lucky item they have to touch before takeoff, a specific breakfast they always eat, a prayer they always say. Don't mock those things. Whatever helps a man get through the mission is valid. What's your ritual?" Tommy smiled thinly. "I write a letter to my mother before every mission. I don't send them. She'd have a heart attack if she got one every few days. I just write them, seal them, and keep them in my footlocker. When I get home, I'll burn them. But writing them helps me remember why I'm here, what I'm protecting. It centers me." David filed that information away. He'd need to find his own ritual, his own way of managing the stress of leading men into mortal danger repeatedly. For now, he had more immediate concerns. "Let's round up the crew. I want to see our aircraft before dark. Even if we can't fly her yet, we can start learning her. Every bolt, every rivet, every system. Tomorrow, we become a crew. Today, we start becoming familiar with the machine that's going to keep us alive." The B-17G model designated to their crew sat on hard stand number 7, her bare aluminum skin reflecting the weak winter sun breaking through the clouds. David approached the aircraft with his crew trailing behind him, each man silently evaluating their new home. She was enormous up close. The nose stretched out in a greenhouse of plexiglass, where Williams and Goldstein would work during missions. The 4 Wright Cyclone engines looked massive, their propellers still. The dorsal turret, where Mitchell would spend his missions, sat just behind the cockpit. Bristling from various positions were the barrels of .50 caliber machine guns,
Two in the nose, two in the dorsal turret, two in the ball turret underneath, two at the waist positions, two in the tail, and a single .50 in the forward nose position for the bombardier. Harrison walked around the aircraft with the critical eye of a builder evaluating someone else's work. He touched the rivets, checked the panels, examined the landing gear with minute attention to detail. "She's solid," he announced after his inspection. "Factory fresh, probably less than 50 hours on her. The engines look good, no oil leaks, no signs of stress. Tires are new. Plexiglass is clear, no cracks or cloudiness. She'll do." David climbed the ladder into the forward hatch, entering the aircraft from below. The interior smelled of new paint, metal, and oil. He made his way forward to the cockpit, sliding into the left seat, the pilot's position. Tommy took the copilot's seat to his right. The instrument panel spread before them: airspeed indicator, altimeter, artificial horizon, turn coordinator, vertical speed indicator, engine instruments for all four motors, fuel gauges, hydraulic pressure, oxygen levels. Every dial and gauge had a purpose, and in combat, David would need to monitor all of them while flying the aircraft, making tactical decisions, and leading his crew. "Familiarize yourself with every switch," David called back to the crew, who were exploring their positions. "I want everyone to know their station so well they could operate it blindfolded. Mitchell, get in your turret and practice tracking. Jensen, same thing in the tail. Murphy, get down into the ball and make sure you fit comfortably. You're going to spend hours down there." The crew dispersed through the aircraft. David began his own checklist, touching each control, testing each switch, building the muscle memory that would make flying this bird second nature. The control yoke felt solid under his hands. The rudder pedals had good resistance. The throttle quadrant moved smoothly, all four levers tracking together. "Tommy, call out the emergency procedures. Let's run through them dry." For the next 3 hours, they practiced. Fire in number 3 engine. Feather the prop, activate the fire suppression, adjust trim for asymmetric thrust. Hydraulic failure. Manual gear extension procedures. Prepare for wheels-up landing. Oxygen system failure. Emergency descent to breathable altitude. Fighter attacks from various angles, which guns had coverage, how to coordinate defensive fire, evasive maneuvers that didn't break formation. Goldstein set up his navigation table, organizing his charts, plotting tools, and celestial navigation equipment. O'Brien tested his radio gear, making sure he could communicate with the pilot, the tower, and other aircraft.
The waist gunners, Rousseau and Patterson, practiced coordinating their fire, making sure they understood their overlapping fields of fire and how to avoid shooting each other or their own tail during the chaos of combat. Harrison moved through the aircraft like a ghost, checking systems, ensuring everything functioned correctly, mentally cataloging the location of every tool and spare part stored in various compartments. As the sun began to set, painting the English countryside in shades of gold and purple, David called the crew together in the waist section of the aircraft. 10 men in a space designed more for function than comfort, but they made it work. "Impressions?" David asked. "Speak freely." Mitchell spoke first. "Sir, the turret is responsive. The guns are perfectly calibrated. Whoever set these 50s up knew their business. I've got good visibility in all directions except directly below, but that's what the ball turret is for. I can coordinate with Murphy to cover any approach angle." Murphy added, "Ball turret is cramped, but that's expected. I can track smooth in all directions. The intercom system works perfectly. If fighters come from below and behind, I've got them." The reports continued around the circle. Goldstein was satisfied with his workspace. Williams praised the bombsight installation. O'Brien eyed clear communication to all stations. Rousseau and Patterson felt they could work together effectively. Jensen reported good visibility from the tail, though he noted the position felt isolated, a common complaint from tail gunners who sat separated from the rest of the crew by the entire length of the fuselage. Harrison had the most detailed report. "Fuel system is sound, hydraulics are perfect, electrical system has redundancies, the oxygen system has been modified. There's a backup bottle mounted near the cockpit that's not standard. Somebody at the factory was thinking ahead.
Engine controls are smooth. This bird was built by people who cared. Treat her right, and she'll bring us home." David nodded, absorbing the information. "Good. Tomorrow, we fly her. We'll start with basic handling, takeoffs, landings, formation flying. Then we'll work up to combat procedures. The squadron commander wants us mission-ready in 2 weeks. That means 2 weeks to become the best crew in the 8th Air Force." Questions? Harrison asked, "Do we get a crew chief? Somebody to maintain her between missions?" "Yes. We'll meet him tomorrow. He'll coordinate with you on any maintenance issues. Your job is to keep her flying during missions. His job is to keep her flying between missions." Williams raised his hand. "Sir, have you thought about naming her? I know you said we'd wait until after the first mission, but it helps to think of her as more than just a machine." David looked around the interior of the bomber, this massive machine that would carry them into hell and hopefully bring them back. Names were important. They made the aircraft personal, a member of the crew rather than just equipment. But he'd also seen crews become superstitious about names, believing the wrong name could doom them. "After the first mission," he repeated. "We'll name her with paint that's earned, not given. Now, let's get some chow and rest. Tomorrow starts early." The next morning arrived cold and misty, typical for England in January. David was awake before dawn, his mind already running through flight procedures. In the mess hall, he found Tommy already eating, a plate of powdered eggs and toast in front of him. "Couldn't sleep?" David asked, getting his own tray. "Never can before flying. I keep running scenarios in my head. It's probably not healthy." Tommy took a sip of bitter coffee. "You nervous?" "About today? No. It's just a familiarization flight. I'm nervous about the mission. I keep thinking about all the things that can go wrong. Not just mechanical stuff. I trust Harrison on that. But crew coordination, my own decision-making. What if I freeze up when we're under attack? What if I make the wrong call and get someone killed?" Tommy was quiet for a moment. "You know what my first pilot told me? He said fear is okay. Fear keeps you sharp. It's terror that gets you killed, when fear takes over so completely that you can't function. The key is to compartmentalize. In the moment, you're not thinking about death. You're thinking about the next action. Watch the instruments, adjust the trim, call the heading to the navigator. Fire extinguisher on number 2. Bank left to avoid the flak burst. Every action is a problem to solve, not a step closer to death. You stay busy, you stay sharp, you stay alive." "What happened to him, your first pilot?" "He stopped compartmentalizing, started thinking too much about the big picture, about odds and statistics and probability. 16th mission, he hesitated for 3 seconds when we took the engine hit I told you about. 3 seconds of thinking instead of doing. That's what killed him and 6 others. Don't think, Lieutenant. Just fly." The rest of the crew filtered into the mess hall, each man dealing with pre-flight nervousness in their own way. Mitchell ate like he was fueling for a marathon. Murphy barely touched his food. The waist gunners joked with each other, probably using humor to push down anxiety. Goldstein kept checking and rechecking his navigation notes, even though they were just doing local flying today.
After breakfast, they assembled at the aircraft. Crew Chief Master Sergeant Donald Price was already there, a short, thick-bodied man with oil stains permanently etched into his hands. He'd been maintaining bombers since before the war, first at stateside training bases, now here in England. "Lieutenant Parker?" Price had a voice like gravel. "I'm your crew chief. This is Corporal Anderson and Corporal Martinez. They'll be assisting me. Between the 3 of us, we'll keep this bird in the air. I understand your flight engineer knows his stuff. Good. That makes my job easier. Now, walk-around time." Price conducted them around the aircraft, pointing out specific details. "These G models have improved turbo superchargers for better high-altitude performance. The ball turret is the newer style with better hydraulics. The tail guns have been upgraded with improved reflector sights. The armor plating around the cockpit has been increased, and there's additional protection for the fuel tanks. She's got the latest self-sealing fuel tank technology. Takes a lot to set her on fire now." He patted the fuselage affectionately. "The factory calls her a fortress. I call her a flying tank that happens to carry bombs. Treat her right, don't push the engines past red line unless it's life or death, and she'll bring you home every time. Questions?" Harrison asked about engine maintenance schedules. Price and he fell into a technical discussion about oil pressure specifications and recommended procedures for different flight conditions. The conversation was reassuring. Two professionals who knew their business, ensuring the aircraft would function when it mattered most. "All right, crew," David called out. "Let's pre-flight her and get airborne. I want to see how she handles before we start formation training." The pre-flight inspection took 30 minutes, checking control surfaces, examining the engines, testing the landing gear, verifying fuel levels, confirming all defensive guns were properly installed and functioning. Finally, David and Tommy climbed into the cockpit and began the starting sequence. Battery on, fuel pumps on, mixture rich, throttles cracked, master switches on. David's hands moved through the familiar sequence, with Tommy calling out each item on the checklist to verify nothing was missed. "Clear number 1, David yelled out the window. The inertial starter on the number 1 engine, the left outboard, wound up with a rising whine. At the right moment, David engaged the engine. The propeller turned, the engine coughed, caught, and roared to life. Black smoke belched from the exhaust, then cleared as the right cyclone settled into a powerful idle. They repeated the process for engines 2, 3, and 4. The noise was incredible, even through their headsets. 4 1,200 horsepower engines creating a symphony of power. David could feel the aircraft trembling, eager to fly. He advanced the throttles slightly, tested the brakes, confirmed all instruments showed normal readings. "Tower, this is Fortress 7 requesting taxi clearance." "Fortress 7, Tower, you're cleared to taxi runway 27. Wind is 280 at 10 knots. Altimeter 29092. David released the brakes and began taxiing, the massive bomber moving with surprising grace despite its size. He ran through his takeoff checks. Trim set, flaps at 15 degrees, mixture rich, props full forward, fuel on mains, cowl flaps open, tailwheel locked. At the end of the runway, he held the brakes and pushed the throttles forward, watching the engine instruments. Manifold pressure, RPM, oil pressure, cylinder head temperature, all normal. He released the brakes. "Here we go." The B-17 accelerated down the runway, slowly at first, then building speed. The tail came up as they reached 40 knots. At 90 knots, David pulled back on the yoke and the bomber lifted gracefully into the air. "Gear up." The wheels tucked smoothly into their wells, and David felt the B-17 transform from earthbound machine to airborne predator. Below, the English countryside spread out in patchwork greens and browns, divided by ancient stone walls and the occasional village. The 4 engines thrummed with perfect synchronization, a sound that would become as familiar as his own heartbeat. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Tommy's voice came through the intercom, tinged with something close to affection. "She handles like a dream," David responded, banking gently to the left, feeling how the massive aircraft responded to his inputs. Smooth, predictable, solid. "All stations, report in. Sound off." One by one, each crew member confirmed their position. Mitchell in the top turret, Murphy squeezed into the ball turret beneath them, Goldstein at his navigation table, Williams at the bombardier's position, O'Brien at his radio station, the waist gunners at their posts, Jensen alone in the tail, and Harrison monitoring the engines and systems. Back on the ground, Price and his crew immediately swarmed the aircraft, checking for any issues from the flight. David led his crew through a debriefing, discussing what worked and what needed improvement. It was the first of many such sessions. The days blurred together in a haze of training flights, classroom instruction on German fighter tactics, practice bomb runs over the English countryside, and formation flying with other crews. David learned to hold his position in the combat box formation, the defensive arrangement that allowed B-17s to overlap their fields of fire, creating the wall of lead that would protect them from fighters. He also learned the grim mathematics of the air war. In the officers' club, over drinks that tasted like paint thinner, he heard the stories. Entire squadrons decimated over Schweinfurt. Aircraft that simply disappeared into clouds, never to be seen again. The lucky crews who made it home on 2 engines, or with half their tail blown off, held together by Harrison's genius and pure determination. On their 10th day at Bassingbourn, Captain Webb summoned David to operations. "Tomorrow," Webb said without preamble, "your crew's first mission. Target is a submarine pen at Saint-Nazaire. It's not the worst target. Coastal,
Relatively light fighter opposition compared to going deep into Germany, but it's real combat. Fighters will attack. Flak will try to kill you. The men you've been training with will be shooting to kill. David felt his mouth go dry. Yes, sir. What's our position in the formation? Element lead, 2nd Squadron. You'll have 2 wingmen. Your job is to maintain position, drop your bombs on the lead bombardier's mark, and bring your crew home. Simple on paper. In practice, Webb shrugged. Just remember your training. And Parker, don't try to be a hero. Dead heroes don't complete tours. That night, David couldn't eat. He tried to write a letter home, but couldn't find words that didn't sound like a goodbye. Instead, he found himself in the aircraft, sitting alone in the dark cockpit, running through procedures in his mind. This was where Tommy found him, 2 hours before dawn. Figured you'd be here, Tommy said, climbing into the co-pilot seat. I wrote my letter to my mother, helped a little. What do you say? Hey, Mom, might die tomorrow. Hope you're doing well? I tell her about the crew, about you, about how we work together. I describe England, the base, the little things. It reminds me I'm human, not just a pilot, that whatever happens tomorrow, I lived. I mattered. He paused. We're gonna make it, David. I've got a feeling about this crew. We're the ones who beat the odds. How can you be sure? I can't, but I choose to believe it anyway, because the alternative is going up there already defeated. The dawn briefing was subdued. 36 aircraft would participate, 4 squadrons of 9 bombers each. The target, concrete submarine pens that had defied previous bombing attempts. The route, across the English Channel, over occupied France, strike the target, and return the same way. Expected opposition, moderate fighter presence, heavy flak over the target. David helped his crew prepare. Williams triple-checked his bomb sight. Goldstein plotted and replotted their course. The gunners loaded ammunition, thousands of rounds of .50 caliber death. Harrison conducted his own inspection, finding a minor oil leak on number 2 engine and fixing it in 15 minutes. At 0700 hours, the engines coughed to life across the airfield. The sound of 144 Wright Cyclone engines was like the voice of an angry god. David ran through his checklist with mechanical precision, his training overriding his fear, just as Tommy had predicted. They took off in sequence, forming up over the English countryside as the sun broke the horizon. The sight of 36 flying fortresses in formation was magnificent and terrible. American industrial might made manifest, flying to deliver destruction to the enemy. Navigator to pilot, Goldstein's voice crackled. Course 220. Estimated time to French coast 28 minutes. Roger that. All gunners, test your weapons. The defensive guns erupted in short bursts, the sound muffled inside the aircraft, but clearly visible outside, streams of tracer fire lancing from every bomber in the formation. Thousands upon thousands of rounds, a demonstration of firepower meant to intimidate any fighter pilot foolish enough to attack. The Channel passed beneath them, gray and cold. Then France. Occupied France. Enemy territory. David felt his heart rate increase. Somewhere down there were German fighter bases, scrambling to intercept them. Somewhere ahead, flak batteries were training their guns on the predicted flight path. Pilot to crew, we're in enemy territory. Stay alert. Call out any fighters immediately.
15 minutes passed. 20. The formation droned on, maintaining perfect discipline. David's hands were sweaty inside his gloves. He could see other bombers around them, their crews surely feeling the same mixture of tension and dread. Fighters! Fighters at 12 o'clock high! Mitchell's voice exploded through the intercom. David's training took over. All gunners, weapons free. Maintain formation. Here they come. The German fighters dove toward them, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, at least 20 of them. But these weren't the overconfident pilots Klaus Richter had led. These were veterans who'd learned respect for the flying fortress. They stayed high, making fast, slashing attacks designed to avoid the worst of the defensive fire. The sky erupted in chaos. Tracers from the bombers created a lethal web. The German fighters twisted and rolled, trying to find angles of attack that minimized their exposure. The noise was overwhelming, machine guns roaring, engines screaming, the metallic pings of bullets hitting their aircraft. "Got him!" Murphy's voice triumphant. "Ball turret got one. He's smoking." "Two more coming from 9 o'clock level," Russo called from the waist. David held the formation, making only minor adjustments. Beside him, Tommy called out threats and helped manage the throttles. A focal wolf flashed past their nose, so close David could see the pilot's face. Williams fired the nose gun, tracers chasing the fighter as it dove away. Then came the sound every pilot dreaded, the crump, crump, crump of flak bursts. Black clouds appeared around them, each one a bundle of jagged steel fragments capable of shredding metal and flesh. The formation flew through it, maintaining course, because to deviate was to invite more accurate fire. "Bomb bay doors open," Williams called. "I have the target. Bombardier has control." The aircraft shuddered as the bay doors opened, increasing drag. They were committed now, had to maintain exact heading and altitude for the bomb run. They were helpless, flying straight and level while flak and fighters tried to kill them. "Steady, steady," Williams' voice was calm, professional. "Bombs away." David felt the aircraft jump upward as 4,000 pounds of bombs fell free. Around them, the entire formation released simultaneously. The submarine pens below disappeared in a carpet of explosions. "Bomb bay doors closed. Pilot has control." David immediately began a gentle turn, following the lead aircraft toward home. The fighters pressed their attacks, knowing the bombers were most vulnerable when breaking formation to return to base. But the gunners were ready, putting up a wall of fire that forced the Germans to maintain distance. "Number 4 engine's been hit," Harrison's voice, urgent but controlled. "Oil pressure dropping, temp rising. We need to feather it." David's hands moved automatically. Throttle for number 4 to idle, propeller to feather position, fuel valve closed, the propeller blades rotated to present minimum drag, and the engine went silent. The aircraft yawed slightly to the right, and David compensated with rudder trim. "Can we maintain formation on 3 engines?" Tommy asked. Harrison responded after a moment's calculation. "Affirm. We're light now with the bombs gone. Should be able to keep up, but we're burning more fuel on the remaining engines." The flight home was tense. Every minute felt like an hour. The fighters finally broke off as they approached the channel, running low on fuel, unwilling to risk being shot down over water. The flak had ceased once they'd left French airspace. But the aircraft was wounded, trailing a thin stream of oil from the dead engine. "Landing gear down," David ordered as they approached Bassingbourn. The hydraulic system groaned but complied. Green lights, all 3 wheels locked. Flaps to full, 3-engine landing, everyone brace. The touchdown was harder than usual, the aircraft wanting to pull right without the number 4 engine for symmetry. David fought it, keeping the nose straight, applying careful braking. They rolled out and taxied to their hard stand, where Price and his crew were already waiting. As the engines shut down and silence fell, David realized his hands were shaking. They'd done it. First mission, and everyone was alive. The aircraft was damaged, but repairable. They dropped their bombs on target. It was everything a first mission could be, terrifying and successful in equal measure. 3 months passed. David's crew flew mission after mission, each one adding to their experience and their legend. They were the crew that always came home, even when damaged, the aircraft that could be counted on to hold formation, to hit the target, to survive. They named her Defiant, painted below the pilot's window in bold letters, because that's what they were, defiant in the face of flak and fighters, of odds and statistics, of everything the enemy threw at them. Mitchell had 6 confirmed kills now, his accuracy with the top turret legendary. Murphy had saved them twice by spotting fighters coming from below that no one else had seen. The waist gunners worked with such coordination they were called the Pennsylvania Twins despite being cousins. Jensen's tail position had become a graveyard for German fighters who thought they could attack from behind. Goldstein never got them lost, even when weather obscured the stars. Williams never missed a target. O'Brien's radio work had guided them home through fog so thick they couldn't see their own wingtips. Harrison had kept engines running that should have failed, performed miracles with damaged systems, worked magic with spare parts and determination. And Tommy was the steady hand that David relied on, the voice of experience, the partner who made every flight possible. But the war was escalating. The targets were deeper in Germany now, the fighter opposition more intense, the flak more accurate. Crews were still being lost at horrific rates. The replacement crews arriving at Bassingbourn looked younger every week, and David realized with a shock that he now had the 1,000-yard stare he'd seen in Webb's eyes that first day. Their 24th mission, one away from completing their tour, was Berlin itself, the most defended target in Europe, the mission everyone dreaded. The briefing was grim. Losses were expected to be heavy, but the target was crucial, an aircraft factory producing the new jet fighters that could outrun anything the Allies had. It had to be destroyed, whatever the cost. 24 down, 1 to go, Tommy said as they walked to Defiant. We're going to make it, David. I can feel it. David wanted to believe him, but Berlin meant every fighter the Luftwaffe could muster. It meant flak so thick you could walk on it. It meant hours deep in enemy territory with nowhere to hide. The mission began like all the others. The formation, the channel crossing, the penetration into France, then Germany. But as they approached Berlin, the opposition became apocalyptic. Fighters swarmed like angry hornets, not the careful, calculated attacks they'd learned to expect, but desperate, furious assaults. The pilots knew what was at stake. They pressed home their attacks despite the defensive fire, accepting casualties to stop the bombers. They're everywhere, Mitchell's voice, for the first time showing fear. I can't track them all. Just keep firing. All gunners, rapid fire, don't let them set up. David was shouting now, though he didn't realize it. The flak was even worse, solid walls of explosions that the formation had to fly through. Defiant shook and shuddered as fragments hit her skin. The plexiglass in the nose starred from a near miss. An explosion so close David could feel the heat knocked them sideways, and he fought to regain position. Bombs away, Williams called, and they turned for home. That's when disaster struck. A Messerschmitt, already mortally wounded and trailing fire, made one last desperate attack. The pilot, knowing he was dead anyway, flew straight into the formation. His aircraft clipped Defiant's No. 2 engine, the one right next to David's cockpit. The world exploded in noise and confusion. The No. 2 engine disintegrated in a fireball. Shrapnel tore through the cockpit. David felt something slam into his chest. Later he'd learn it was a piece of the engine cowling, and his vision went gray. David! David, stay with me! Tommy was flying the aircraft now, wrestling with controls that barely responded. No. 2 was gone completely, torn off the wing. No. 1 was damaged, running rough. They were on 2 engines, numbers 3 and 4, the ones on the right wing. The aircraft wanted to roll left, and it took all of Tommy's strength to keep them level. Harrison, I need options. Harrison responded immediately. Transfer all fuel to the right wing tanks for balance. Shut down No. 1, it's about to seize anyway. We fly home on 2 engines, or we don't fly home at all. David fought his way back to consciousness. His chest hurt abominably, and he could feel blood inside his flight suit. But his hands could still grip the yoke. I've got it, he gasped to Tommy. Like hell you do. I'm flying us home. You just stay conscious. They'd fallen out of formation, couldn't keep up on 2 engines. Below them, Germany scrolled past. Enemy territory, hundreds of miles from safety. The other bombers pulled ahead, disappearing into the distance. They were alone. Fighters, Jensen called from the tail. 4 of them, 6 o'clock high. They see we're crippled. They're coming in. This was it, David thought, through the haze of pain. This was where their luck ran out. Alone, damaged, barely flying, easy prey for the hunters. But he'd forgotten something. He'd forgotten about his crew. The German fighters dove, expecting an easy kill. What they got instead was a masterclass in defensive gunnery from men who'd been doing this for 3 months, who knew their weapons as extensions of their bodies, who'd fought together so long they could anticipate each other's moves.
Mitchell and the waist gunners created a crossfire that caught the first fighter head-on. It exploded spectacularly. Murphy and the ball turret tracked the second with mechanical precision, his rounds walking up the fighter's fuselage until they found the cockpit. Jensen's tail guns caught the third fighter as it tried to attack from behind, sending it spiraling down, trailing smoke. The fourth fighter, seeing his companions fall, lost his nerve and broke off. "Clear skies," Jensen called. "They're gone." But they were still deep in Germany, on 2 engines, with a wounded pilot and damaged aircraft. The English Channel seemed impossibly far away. "Goldstein," Tommy called, "give me the most direct route home. I don't care if it takes us over every flak battery in Germany. We need the shortest distance." "Plotting now, got it. Course 285. But Tommy, that takes us over—" "I don't care what it takes us over. That's our course." For the next 2 hours, they flew a tightrope between heaven and earth. The 2 remaining engines screamed at maximum power, pushed beyond their limits. Harrison coaxed every bit of performance from them, adjusting mixture and propeller pitch with the skill of a concert pianist. Goldstein's navigation was perfect, every turn, every heading change calculated to save precious seconds in fuel. Williams helped fly the aircraft from the bombardier's position, his hands on the nose wheel steering. The gunners kept watch, calling out landmarks, watching for fighters. O'Brien sent out a constant stream of radio calls. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Defiant. Damaged aircraft, 2 engines, requesting emergency landing clearance." They crossed the channel on fumes. Number 3 engine coughed, sputtered, and David's heart stopped. But Harrison adjusted something, and it caught again, running rough, but running. "I see England," Williams called. "I see the coast." "Bassingbourn, this is Defiant. Request emergency landing. Aircraft heavily damaged. Pilot wounded. 2 engines out." "Defiant, Bassingbourn Tower, you're cleared to land any runway. Emergency crews are standing by. Your #1 priority." Tommy lined them up for the approach. The landing gear came down. Green lights. Thank God. Flaps extended partially. The hydraulics were nearly shot. David tried to help, but his vision was graying again. He was losing blood faster than he'd realized. "Tommy," he managed. "Stay with me, David. We're almost home. Don't you dare die when we're this close." The runway appeared ahead. Tommy brought them in, fighting the asymmetric thrust, the damaged controls, the wounded bird that wanted to die but wouldn't. Not yet. Not until her crew was safe. The wheels touched. They bounced once, settled. Tommy reversed props on the 2 working engines and stood on the brakes. Defiant rolled out and finally stopped 300 feet from the end of the runway. Silence. Blessed, beautiful silence. Then the emergency crews were there, pulling open hatches, helping the crew out. Medics rushed to David, stabilizing him for transport to the base hospital. He tried to speak, to make sure everyone was okay, but the world was fading. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was his crew, all of them, standing beside Defiant, battered, exhausted, but alive. All of them alive. David woke in a hospital bed 3 days later. The wound to his chest, a jagged piece of shrapnel that had lodged between 2 ribs, had been removed. He'd lost a lot of blood but would make a full recovery. The doctor said he was lucky. An inch to the left and it would have hit his heart. Tommy was the first visitor. "You missed the celebration," he said, sitting beside the bed. "They're calling it the miracle flight, a crippled bomber alone over Germany fighting off fighters and making it home. The base commander wants to recommend you for a medal." "The crew, everyone okay?" "Not a scratch except you. Harrison says Defiant can be repaired. Take a few weeks, but she'll fly again." Tommy smiled. "We completed our tour, David. 25 missions. We beat the odds."
We beat them together. Best crew in the 8th Air Force, just like I said.
Over the next week, visitors came. Mitchell brought him a bottle of whiskey, borrowed from the officers' club. Murphy brought him a book. Figured you'd be bored. The waist gunners brought news from the base. Jensen brought a photograph of Defiant, damaged but defiant still. Goldstein brought a chess set, and they played games while he recovered. Williams brought updates on the crew's reassignment. They'd be training new crews now, passing on their hard-won knowledge. O'Brien brought letters from home that had arrived while David was unconscious. Harrison brought a piece of the No. 2 engine, mounted on wood as a souvenir, reminder of what we survived. And Webb came, the operations officer who'd given David his first mission briefing a lifetime ago. He looked older, more tired. "Your crew started something, Parker," Webb said. "Other crews saw what you did, saw that it was possible to survive, to work together, to bring everyone home. The loss rates are still terrible, but they're improving. Every crew that learns from your example, every pilot who trusts his men, every gunner who coordinates his fire, that's your legacy." A month later, David stood with his crew at a ceremony. They were being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, all of them. But the medal David treasured most wasn't the DFC. It was the silver star they pinned on Harrison's chest. The flight engineer who'd kept them flying against all odds, who'd worked miracles with damaged engines and failing systems, who'd saved them more times than David could count. As they stood together, David looked at the men who'd become more than his crew. They were his brothers. They'd faced death together and won. Not because they were fearless, but because they'd learned to master their fear. Not because they were lucky, but because they'd made their own luck through skill and determination. Not because they were heroes, but because they'd done their jobs, together, when it mattered most. That's what the Flying Fortress had taught them. That armor and guns weren't what made them survive. It was trust. It was teamwork. It was the unbreakable bond between men who'd flown through hell and brought each other home. Thank you for flying with us through this thunder over Europe. Until the next story, keep exploring, keep learning, and never forget the extraordinary courage of ordinary people in extraordinary times. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you in the next epic adventure.